So trauma isn't always about what happened to us, but actually a lot of the time it can be what didn't happen for us. Now, what do I mean by this? It's going to be the topic of today's video. We're going to be talking about experiences of trauma, a perspective about trauma that you may not have been exposed to before. Most of us associate trauma with a significant event, especially a particular life-threatening or a violating event. But actually, trauma can be experienced in a lot of diverse ways, and one of them we're going to talk about today is the experience of something not happening to regulate us and help us feel safe in a situation, and how this relates to ongoing anxiety and trauma symptoms. So, for example, we'll run you through a very common experience, probably one you've all had at some point in your life, but maybe don't remember it. The very first time you get left at nursery. If you're other places in the world, you might call it kindergarten or something else. Your first experience of being in a structured setting when you're very young, and your parent has to drop you off and has to leave at some point after that. And for many of us, when we're children, that experience is quite overwhelming. It's maybe the first time our parent has actually left us for a period of time with strangers that we do not know. So we're going to talk about it through the nervous system and how this relates to any symptoms you may be experiencing. So an example of being left for nursery, that experience of being left can trigger a signal in our nervous system where we feel unsafe. I'm being left with a stranger and the person that I know is leaving me behind. That's what is going to be felt from a very young child's perspective, maybe age 3 to 4, for example. In that state, my nervous system is going to be triggered into fight-flight response, or the yellow zone is what it's referred to as from Dr. Stephen Porges' perspective of the nervous system, which is one I use with clients. In that yellow zone, there's all this activation and feeling, and in that moment, if another adult can co-regulate with me, use their nervous system, their body, their words, their tone, their facial expression, to help me feel soothed, to help me feel connected, I can be co-regulated out of that kind of space, and I can come back down to the green zone, the zone of connection, of safety. And the presence of someone else co-regulating with me, because when I'm a child I can't do that on my own yet, that will help me feel grounded and safe, and that experience no longer feels like something traumatic or activating in a way that I can no longer tolerate. If that isn't available to me or is not being provided in a sufficient way, what can happen in this example is my body, my nervous system will stay in that yellow zone of activation, and eventually I will hit my capacity to tolerate that amount of anxiety, of fear, of other emotions that might be running through me, but it's most likely anxiety and fear in this example. My body is going to kick in its safety mechanism, which is to push me into the red zone of nervous system activation. It's called dorsal vagal collapse, for anyone wondering. And this is a space where my body shuts down and suppresses and contains that energy and emotion, because feeling it and experience it for a certain amount of time is too much. So the body puts the handbrakes on and collapses me into the red zone, where we feel disconnected, we feel numb, we're very suppressed and withdrawn. We actually disconnect from people in that. Now, the presence of a safe person, someone else to co-regulate with me, can bring me down out of that state, go from red down to yellow, down to green. Now, how does this relate to what we're talking about? Trauma, in this example, is the experience of the lack of something happening for me to feel safe again. So the lack of a co-regulating presence, another adult, or in adult life it might be our ability to do it for ourselves as well as someone safe to do it with us. For a lot of us, this is the experience of trauma that we have, experiencing something that triggers our nervous system so much so that we feel super activated and we don't have someone else or can't do it ourselves to regulate ourselves back down to grounded, calm, connected and safe. It's that sort of transition that can be locked in our bodies, and thus that locked in, suppressed state, if that happens consistently, it means that those feelings are waiting to be triggered later down the line. Now that could be days later, it could be weeks later, it could be months later, it might be something that's repeatedly triggered. If we are consistently back in that situation and haven't learned to co-regulate ourselves, and that also comes from our early experiences of someone else helping us do that when we're younger, when we don't actually have the capacity to do it for ourselves yet. So many times I work for clients, this is an experience that has been overlooked. They would not normally be someone that identifies with the label as trauma, because they say, well, I haven't been involved in war, I've not been exposed to terrorism, I haven't been sexually abused or been in a violent relationship. I don't really see any form of trauma. But when we look closer at their history, sometimes there's an experience of being overwhelmed, activated in a way that triggers certain feelings, and we're not able to regulate ourselves. We don't have someone else to help regulate us out of that. And it's that absence of that skill, which means the body stores that trigger, that activation, that feeling, that emotion. And so when it's reactivated again, we get in a state of helplessness and overwhelm and not knowing what to do. So this is the link between some traumatic experiences, more specifically what didn't happen after an experience or an event, which makes that a vulnerable trigger, a trauma trigger in us that gets re-triggered over and over again, giving us trauma and anxiety symptoms, that feeling of being activated, overwhelmed, anxious, frightened. It might also be other emotions too, like sadness or guilt or shame. These are other really common trigger feelings that activate us, and we feel like we can't cope and we feel stuck in that experience. This is why the presence of a helping professional or a family member or a friend who can co-regulate with you, that can use their nervous system in a grounded, connected, close, safe way to teach your nervous system to regulate and come back down. So I hope this video has been useful. It is a quick glimpse of some theory about the nervous system and the link between trauma and anxiety. If you want more content like this, let me know in a comment down below, or like this video and I will expand on some other examples and areas on this topic. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.